Okay, we're back. I'm talking on the stream. Um, but I want to discuss the outline of my paper today. And um, this is a project that I've been working on for a while, as many of you know. I I have set a personal goal of when to have it hopefully finished, at least a version one. And um, that is coming up pretty soon. So I kind of want to go over the various aspects of it and kind of discuss what it's like to write a paper on the theory of everything. And because it's not like anything else that you can write, it has unique considerations, and it that those considerations are mainly that it must follow the pattern that it describes in the paper. The paper must follow the pattern that it describes in the paper. This is something that I've never seen in any descriptions of the quote unquote theories of everything that are out there. It has to be a self-referential structure. That is what the theory of everything is. It is the pattern of self-reference, and it is internally, intrinsically consistent and coherent to such a degree that you can't describe it in a way that isn't. You cannot do theory of everything. Let's back up. What is a theory of everything? I've discussed this before. A theory of everything is really a theory of every one when you understand what a theory of what the theory of everything is, quote unquote. And on my website, sentientsingularity.com, you can see the definition of what a theory of everything is, because it's not well defined anywhere except here. And a theory of everything is a recognizable, predictable, and describable pattern that occurs in all instances of objective observation and an explanation for such a pattern. So it is a description of the pattern that is the ever-present pattern of the universe, essentially, of everything in the universe, everything that is created. And also, because of this last part, and an explanation for such a pattern, you need to explain why that pattern is there. So there is a pattern that is the ever-present pattern, that is the pattern of logos, or the generative structure of existence, is basically the definition of logos. And it is the fractal structure. That's what logos is. It is the generative structure. It is the continuously emerging and growing pattern. So you need a description of that, and you also need an explanation for that pattern, and the description of that pattern needs to mirror the pattern itself. And if it doesn't, then it's not it's not a successful description of the theory of everything. It has to be internally consistent. There's other issues as well that I've kind of been dealing with, is that the logos, or the universe, existence, God, consciousness, it is an animate. It's not inanimate, it's animated. It's an animated structure. It is evolving and maneuvering and changing and adapting. It's not static. There are certain aspects of the pattern that never change, but it itself is a generative structure. Okay, I think Chris Langan has said something similar to this. I don't know if he used the word generative, but it's it's not. He might have, but it's a very good word. And it's not a static just equation that you can write down onto a piece of paper and that's it. And it's just a bunch of algebra and it doesn't change. That's not how you describe the theory of everything. That's why so many theories have failed, I think, is because you need an animated model. This is a fact. You cannot describe an animated structure without an animated model. Okay? And that is why on my website, that animated model is on the front page, because it is essentially right there the theory of everything. Every part of this process, at least from one perspective, and there's many different perspectives that you can use to create models that describe the same structure and offer you a different perspective on the same structure. But this is a two-dimensional, somebody called it a packing fraction of a fiber bundle, which it is a fiber bundle. It's a two-dimensional representation of a fiber bundle. And I believe somebody called it a packing fraction, though. That I'm not sure if that's an accurate description, but they did say that to me. But it is a two-dimensional representation of a fiber bundle that is generating information. So it's growing, like a human being grows. It starts off, as a zygote, and then it ends up as grandpa. So, and not even just grandpa, family and beyond. So it is a growing structure, and you can't represent it and still get the picture across in just a page of equations. It has to be shown for what it is, which is it's a structure that moves. It's not static. So I think that this is essential, and there's many different ways in which you could make an animated model, but I do think that an animated model is a necessary component to this. So it's interesting because we haven't really had a theory of everything other than scripture, which that's very deep, and we are the animated model that scripture is describing, but society is. But we've never had a successful attempt at a theory of everything. People will say, everybody thinks that they've done a successful attempt, but the thing is unless it's been recognized as a leap forward, and I don't mean just everyone's work is a leap forward, but I mean a leap forward, like it's accepted, like relativity was accepted. It's not successful because it would be adopted. It's not that there is this idea that a lot of people think that they've figured it out and that it just goes unnoticed. And it's possible that that's the case, but it's not. It's also not. Everything happens for a reason, and if it doesn't, somebody wrote a book, Luis Razzo, who I would consider a friend, and I've done an interview with him before. He has a theory of everything. He also has a YouTube channel called A Theory of Everything, I think, and he wrote a book that is essentially his theory of everything. I've not read it. I do plan on getting the book eventually, but it's not something that is widely accepted, and he knows that. I'm not criticizing him. But even though I look at it and I'm like, that's onto something. That's more than onto something. It's very aligned with my work and the work of many others, and it's not it hasn't made progress though. It has no momentum. And the reason for that is because of multiple things. But it's not necessarily that it's wrong. It's that in what he's trying to convey, it's that the way in which it's conveyed is wrong. There's always, in every other attempt, academic attempt, there is just two possibilities. You're right or you're wrong. In the theory of everything, it's not really about being right or wrong. It's about being pretty much there, but also conveying it correctly. And that is the thing that has been missing, is nobody's conveyed it correctly. Closest that I can see that's starting to be there is Wolfram, to be honest. Wolfram's models and his hypergraph structures are... They're just... I don't want to say they're unique, but they are to some degree, and at least the degree of rigor that he's taken them to. But that couldn't have been done in the past, and neither could this animated model. You used to be restricted to books. And it's funny because the Torah is a theory of everything. It's just hidden, and you don't have to agree with me on that, but I believe that. If you believe scripture, then you believe that. Even if it doesn't matter if you're Muslim or Christian or Jewish, it doesn't matter. The Torah is a theory of everything, and it is a scroll. And in that scroll, the amount of lines and columns that scroll contains are set in stone in halachic law, which is like the law, the Jewish law that is considered law from God. You cannot change the number of columns and rows because there's 42 rows in the Torah. You think that's a coincidence? So that is a theory of everything. There's mathematical aspects to the Torah, and the fact that it is contained within a scroll that make it accurately conveyed. If you change it to a book with a subjective and relative and arbitrary amount of pages, you have taken something that was supposed to be a description of the structure of objective multiplicity, of objectivity, of the step above relativity, and you've brought it down to relativity, and you've given it an arbitrary amount of pages, and it no longer can... You're missing information. You're missing major pieces of contextualizing information. And this is also true of the theory of everything. You can't just make it into a book with an arbitrary amount of pages. You can't just make it into a paper with an arbitrary amount of sections and an arbitrary amount of models and an arbitrary amount of equations. I mean, everything will emerge. Not everything, but the main structures, the amount of models that you need, and the amount of equations and what equations those are, all of those are not arbitrary. And the amount of pages in a paper might be arbitrary, but the amount of sections that it requires, the amount of models that are required to convey the totality, at least not the totality, because nobody knows everything except God, and nobody can see everything but God, especially if in a paper. But there are constraints and considerations when you are doing this, and you can't just have it be arbitrary. If you're like, oh, well, my paper is 31 pages, my paper is 19 pages, my paper is 17 pages. I don't know how many pages it has to be, but the amount of sections that those pages contain is probably basically set in stone. It's not something that is up for just, I guess, free choosing. I don't want to say consideration. Of course, it's up for consideration and debate, but there is an objective truth, and you have to. It's very hard to discuss, by the way, so I'm struggling. I apologize, but we don't have the words to describe what I'm trying to build. We have never discussed this before like this, and I think we have to. And if we don't, then you're not going to be successful in describing the theory of everything. Because the thing about the theory of everything, that pattern that is the recognizable, predictable, and describable pattern that occurs in all instances of objective observation, is that it is contextualized within objective instances of observation that follow the pattern that is described in it. So it's a self-referencing structure. Those perspectives that you perceive information, those are, and that you would even perceive the information of a paper while you're reading a paper or watching a video, whatever it is. They will follow the theory of everything, the pattern in the theory of everything, because it is the pattern of mind. That means that you also have to describe it in a way that is aligned with the structure of mind, and it also has to, this is so hard. It has to be entirely consistent. It's like being, what is the phrase where they're describing, like, if you're going to describe consciousness, okay, at the end of my of this little section here, it says, beyond the beginning, consciousness exists, existence is conscious, and consciousness is one. Those four statements, which is, it's 3 plus 1, which is like space and then time, or you could say time and then space, for time space, which is basically the inverse of space-time. It's just an inverted perspective. This is intrinsically consistent, okay? Consciousness exists. Existence is conscious, and consciousness is one. These are 3 perspectives that describe the same thing, which is conscious existence, okay? So you say, what is conscious existence? Well, it is when consciousness exists, existence is conscious, and consciousness is one. And that occurs beyond the beginning. So this is almost like, and an explanation for such a pattern, or length and width, height, time, okay? Past, future, present, and space. So, would be like your current location in space, because there's always 2 degrees of freedom, an intrinsic constraint and an extrinsic constraint. Consciousness exists. Existence is conscious. It's like a tongue twister. These are 2 degrees of freedom. Consciousness is 1. This is an intrinsic constraint. Beyond the beginning, this is an extrinsic constraint. Okay? So this, even right here, follows this pattern right here. You have objective constraint, 2 degrees of freedom, which is right here and right here, and then you have a subjective constraint, always. That is observable right here. That's what I mean by the way in which you describe something will line up with the patterns that that you were describing in the theory of everything. So we don't think about this ever, but we do it naturally. When I wrote this, I wasn't thinking about modeling this. It just happened to be like that. It says, what's the phrase in the Bible? It's like, in the beginning there was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Okay, so in the beginning, extrinsic constraint, there was the Word, and I can't say it like out of context. In the beginning, there was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So basically, this is the Word was God. There was the Word, and the Word was with God. So the Word was with God. There was the Word. The Word was God, which is the intrinsic constraint. It has to be, the Word has to be God because everything is God. There was the Word because, of course, there has to have been the Word spoken that is the logos, essentially, like it is the spoken logos. And the Word was with God, okay, because it's aligned with his will, and it's in the beginning. So this is kind of my take on that, but it's beyond the beginning instead of in the beginning. So in the beginning is more about creation, and this is more a description of existence, creation and creator as one. So notice that they follow the exact same pattern. That pattern is this. There's no way around it. I didn't try and model the Bible on this either. It just comes out like that because there's only one pattern when you're describing something that is an objective structure like the universe or consciousness or existence or God. So it's always going to have the same attributes if you do it correctly. Just like this. Okay? Even if you look at something like the word that is used to describe God, or they say it's God's name, but it's not really God's name. It's more like a description, which is Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey. In Hebrew, though, it goes the opposite direction. This is a spin structure. It's like Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey, Yud. It's spinning. Okay? And this pattern, though, you have an extrinsic constraint, an intrinsic constraint, a positive degree of freedom, and a negative degree of freedom. It's the same exact pattern as this pattern, which is the same exact pattern as this pattern, which is the same exact pattern as in the New Testament that describes, the Word. Why? Because that is how it goes. It's a very reduced version of the theory of everything right here. An extrinsic constraint, an intrinsic constraint, and 2 degrees of freedom. Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey. It's this is a very reduced description of the theory of everything. Beyond the beginning, consciousness exists. Existence is conscious, and consciousness is one. This is the theory of everything, just super, super reduced. So is, in the beginning, there was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. This is also a very reduced version of the theory of everything. You can expand it out into the Torah or into this, okay? But you can reduce it down to this, which is also this. Right here. Inside, outside, separate, oneness. This is a very reduced description of the theory of everything. But it is the, all perspectives come from these four perspectives. But all four of these are necessary to give a complete description of a view, okay? Of a conscious moment. You need to know that the world exists, you exist, others exist, and I'm trying to think of what it would be, but it would be you, your world, you're probably others, and existence itself. It would be like you exist, the world exists, others exist, and existence exists. It's almost like it ends up uniting it all of itself again, just like it's like, and consciousness was one, and the Word was God, and existence exists. It's totally, it ends on oneness. It's like there's inside, there's separateness, and outside, and it's all oneness. Okay, so the final step is almost like the vessel for the other three. So, but I'm trying to just show, because I don't really know how to explain, but I'm trying to show, I hope it's coming across, that these concepts that I'm showcasing here are trying to also apply when you're writing your paper on the theory of everything. You can't just write, you know, I don't know, a bunch, an arbitrary amount of sections to your paper. There is a specific number that is correct. That doesn't mean you can't add something after the fact that's, you know, an addition, but it's not a that addition is an addition. It's not a requirement. So you can be like, well, I'm adding the background for the project. Okay, that may be a choice. I don't know. It might not be a choice. I need to think more about it. But there's aspects of this project that will not be choices. By the way, to anybody watching, gosh, that was really tough to discuss. So I appreciate anybody that was bearing with me. I will be gone tomorrow. It's my wife's birthday, so I will not be on here. I did stream live on Instagram yesterday to kind of make up for it for a bit. You can check it out. It was pretty short, but it was productive. We discussed space-time. It's my latest live video on Instagram. And then on my Theory of Everyone Instagram, not my personal. I will be back, though, on Thursday for the live call in our Discord. But I will not be streaming tomorrow because I have a date. So let's look at the paper a bit. So there's lots of stuff here that I've written. I'm trying to figure out exactly, and I have most of this done. I just, uh, or at least most of this done. But I'm trying to figure out the order and what is exactly required, and then what should maybe be put onto a different paper. And obviously, we start with the abstract, and then you need an introduction. I will include a background. I don't know if it's required, but I'm still going to include it. It might be required. An introduction, the structure of the proposal, this is like basically a description of why everything would be arranged the way that it is. So basically, any description of a fundamental pattern of existence must match that pattern. Any name of a theory of everything must describe the essential nature of existence. This is exactly what I say all the time and what we've been discussing tonight. You can't get around this. So there's a section that is going to be describing that. In totality, this is the 4 primary perspectives, essentially, of the paper. From there, we start breaking into the specifics. What is a sentient singularity? And what is... And basically, I have a section called Reimagining 1 and 0. You can see it on my website under Writings. And it basically goes into... You can see here. It's basically describing why 0 does not equal an empty set or nothing in metaphysics or in metamathematics. The rules change and it equals infinity. It equals infinite oneness, which is a superposition between 1 and infinity, essentially. And it goes on to explain exactly why this is the case. Interestingly enough, 0 as a symbol is a circle, essentially, that is a singular and endless loop. Okay? It is a symbol that, just like I've been discussing, the symbol itself matches what it's meant to describe in metamathematics, okay, or metaphysics. And that's not a coincidence. That's meaningless. It is intentional. Whether or not it was intentional by the guy who first decided 0 was going to be a circle, or whether or not it was from God and through that guy unconsciously, who knows? I don't know. Doesn't matter. It wasn't. It was an intentional creation, and it also is probably required. It must match the structure it's trying to describe. 0 is the symbol. This symbol in metamathematics represents infinite oneness. It is an endless singular loop. Okay? Its shape matches what it represents. That is exactly what I'm trying to get at. The structure of this paper must match the pattern that it is describing within it. So, just like 0. And it will naturally if you do it correctly, but it's also good to look to see what that pattern would be. My stomach is growling, so if you hear that, I'm sorry. I have amazing food right here that I'm not eating, that my wife made me, but I'm saving it for after the stream so that you don't have to listen to me eating. Um, so this structure, though, is described. This idea of why zero is infinite oneness in metamathematics is described on this part of my website, and you can go read it. But it is also part of my paper. It's the one of the first sections of my paper, at least quite a bit of it. And it basically shows that existence and consciousness share the same traits because they have intrinsic oneness. A consciousness is that consciousness, and it encompasses all that consciousness is composed of. Existence is self-contained as well. And it encompasses all that exists. Its information processing must inevitably be internally consistent, okay? Or coherent. Universally coherent, I will say. And sometimes that requires conscious effort because some things go haywire and because of the addition of choice, and then they have to be corrected after the fact. But it's kind of like if your kid makes a mess in your house and then you have to clean it up and organize everything again. That's a choice, and it's a conscious action that you have to make in order to, have your house make any sense. But that's true of the universe as well. Chris Langan discusses this too, and it's something like all paradoxes are resolved in the CTMU, and I have a phrase that is like all at the level of God or existence, paradox is an inevitability, which basically is like seems like a contradictory statement, but it's not. It's that you're describing a superposition structure or a superstructure, and that is a structure that is many and one at the same time, and is dweller and dwelling and mind and matter, and consciousness is a superposition structure. So zero is a superposition structure in metamathematics. It's infinity and oneness. It also encompasses, to some degree, like the limits of multiplicity, because it's like you can go around there for every lap around a circle, like zero. Like if you put it as a track, there is an objective number of laps that you can count as you go around. It's not so subjective that there is no endpoint. There is, as soon as you reach where you already were, that's a lap around. That allows for you to have multiplicity of quanta build within a singular structure that never ends and is intrinsically and internally coherent, because it doesn't. There's no side ramps that take you off of the track that is like a circle. It's just a circle, and you can't stray from it. And then it also has this oneness to it because it is a singular and And it is a single self-contained structure. That's what it is. So it's singular and self-contained. Because it's self-contained, it allows for the creation of multiplicity because you can go as many laps around as you'd like, but it constrains you to a certain pattern as being counted as an additional quanta. And whereas if it was a straight line, you couldn't do that. It's like, where do you, if existence was a straight line, there would be no numbers. There would be no quantities. Okay, where do you end and say, okay, I've traveled far enough. That's one, and then I'll travel a certain distance again, and that's another. As far as information processing goes, you can't do that in a straight line, but you can do that in a circle, because every time you go back to where you get back to where you were, that's an additional quanta. So basically, a zero will allow the structure of a zero, like the geometric the geometry of the symbol that is used for zero is a great. It's not even great. It's perfect. It is the perfect symbol to describe, or it is the perfect symbol for what it is trying to describe in metamathematics, or for what it represents. Even the fact that it's not a perfect circle and that it has this oblong shape to it allows for you to have directionality even. So it's like you have directionality, multiplicity, singularity, and infinity. It's like this is everything that you could ever need. And it's all contained in this single symbol of zero. It's amazing. It's not just me. People will say, well, you're just looking for patterns. Yeah, that's what you do. If you want to understand anything, you look for patterns. There are no patterns that are irrelevant. It might be irrelevant to a question that you're trying to ask. My nose is itching. But it's not possible that it's just a meaningless coincidence. Nothing is a meaningless coincidence. The shape of letters and numbers and the relationship of colors and if you're going to try and go for the theory of everything, it has to describe everything, including zero. Like, why is the symbol for zero the symbol that it is? If your theory can't give that context, it's not a theory of everything. And that's kind of a crazy thing to wrap your mind around, is like, a theory of everything really is a theory of everything. It doesn't mean you can apply it everywhere. That's why we're going to have other people that can always add new insights to any pattern that gets identified. But it will inevitably be able to apply to everything, including the shape of the symbol that we call zero. And it's amazing. So, I mean, I know people will, that's a bit of a leap for a lot of people. If you're like, well, I'm over here and like, it's this theory is supposed to unite quantum mechanics and general relativity, and you're talking about the structure of the symbol of zero. Yeah, the theory of everything is the theory of everything. Eric Weinstein and Garrett Lisi said it doesn't, a theory of everything, unites physics and it doesn't explain love. Yes, it does explain love. If it doesn't explain love, don't tell me you have a theory of everything. It absolutely will explain love. If your theory doesn't explain what love is, it's not a theory of everything. And, love is one of those things that is very linked to a theory of everything because it's a theory of everyone. And love is very, it's part of everyone's being. So there's no way to separate it. It's not even just that it's part of it, everything's part of it. It is, I mean, people will say everything is love. Yeah, like that. It's love is one of those words that is, it's very, very much part of this. It's funny because there's a lot of four-letter words that have so many different meanings. It's like love can be a feeling of being loved. It is also, it is primarily an action, first and foremost, of doing good for others. Um, it is used in countless ways, though, to describe various parts of our being. I mean, you say everything is love, and people will say that I love you, or that I feel loved. I am loving that person. Like there's lot to make love. There's lots of different ways in which this word is used. That's true of a lot of four-letter words I've noticed. Like like a lot of curse words. It's like shit. It's like that's the shit. That's a piece of shit. Like you that can my dog took a shit. Like you can use these words in so many different ways, and it's almost like the context is what is defining of these four-letter words. Fuck is another one. Um, uh, I mean, like, there's a lot. There, a lot of them are, you know, I don't know what YouTube's um, policy is on cursing, so I'm not going to overdo it. But a lot of four-letter curse words have practically endless meanings, and that's also true of love. Um, and a lot of other four-letter words. Face. I mean, crap. I don't know. There's lots of them. Truth. Blue, even like the color blue. It's like I'm blue. Like that has multiple meanings. Lots of four-letter words have many meanings, but it's that they seem to be contextual. Their meaning seems to come from the context in which they're used, which is so weird. I'm gonna think more about it and do a stream about it one day. But so that's reimagining 1 and 0. We need cosmogenesis, which is basically my model of how does creation happen, which is right here. This is a model of creation. And I have a description of it. Next one is the 4 primary perspectives, which is going to be right here, and a description of them. And there's lots more to that, actually, that comes. I'm going to include a information change models to show what these 4 primary perspectives come from as information changes, as basically you spin around. It's interesting. I got I got this dreidel a while back, and it's made of titanium, and which is pretty cool. And I had the guy who made it anodize it green, and it's definitely the best dreidel I've ever had. But after I got this and studying this, is the first dreidel I've ever bought, and I've always just had, you know, little wooden ones with my family back home. But I didn't have a dreidel, and Hanukkah's coming up, so I bought a dreidel. And after I bought it, I realized it's following this theory of everything. It's the 4 primary perspectives spinning. was like, that's fascinating. One of them, so you have Gimel, which is, you know, everything. Uh, Nun is nothing. Shin is half, and or it's to give half. And Hey, which is to get half. So it's like you either get half, you give half, you get it. Uh, it's like all, nothing, uh, get, and give. Like to give, to give to others, or to part of what you have, or to get from others part of what they have. It's fascinating that this little game is linked to like patterns in reality. It gets way crazier than that, actually. On our Discord, we were looking at chess, and I don't play chess, so I was having a member of our community explain it to me, and he plays chess competitively, and the structure of a chessboard mirrors the 64 tetrahedron grid, which is the structure of the scaffolding between matter, basically, in my model. And it's also the 64 tetrahedron grid in Nassim Haramein's model. And in my model, though, right here, of the... Where is it? Right. You could center it. Yeah, here it is. This is basically like a gas, a liquid, a solid. There's always 64 red, which is the gaps or the scaffolding. And then the matter is these cubes that are entangled in different ways and that lock them in place in certain ways that allow them to behave as a fluid, behave as a solid, or and it's really to be perceived as a gas. And so there's always 64 red in every single one, but there's also 81 blocks, like grids, quanta of consciousness. And then they entangle to form the universe. And when you get rid of all the gaps and you totally entangle it, you actually get more information. So it doesn't shrink to be smaller than this. It actually like generates more information from the overlap. Just like the present leads to the information that is the perception of the past and the perception of the future, even though we really just exist in an ever-present. So because you can create linear causal chains in your mind, it allows you to generate information about the past and the future, and to perceive it, even though it doesn't really exist. But you're adding information based on one bit of information, which is the present. You are now extrapolating out more information that leads you to perception of the past or perception of the future, essentially. So if something, you see a tree and it's big, you can be like, okay, in the past it was small, and in the future it's gonna die, or like that kind of. I mean, it's endless, so that's a very, from the hip example, but it's just basically like the extrapolation of additional information from what is your current information. And the amount of quanta of consciousness, though, or grid, or these grids, is 81 in each, separated by 64. Go, which is Chinese version of chess, essentially, is based on, I'm pretty sure, a grid of 81, and chess is based on a grid of 64. So it's almost like the West, our strategy game, that is our strategy game. Chess is the West's strategy game, is based on the scaffolding of reality, and it is also on the reflection of that. You're going to have the I guess the multiplicity within that singularity of reality. So that singularity is basically represented by 64 separate parts, and then the multiplicity generated within is going to be that 81. And it's almost like that's the matter, or the consciousnesses, and then the structure that is containing them is the red. So we are all this multiplicity within, and the red is actually one structure, but we are perceiving bits of it through basically an interwoven lattice, or as Brian Keating has called it, cosmic macrame. If you hold macrame at a certain angle, you can see through it. And if you can see through the cosmic macrame, you can see God, which is the red, essentially. And then all of the gray and black shaded is basically the multiplicity of consciousness within God's singularity of consciousness. So this is another just instance of the observation of a symmetry of our reality, even in our games. It's fascinating. It's not a coincidence. It's not. There's a lesson there, and it might just be that the world follows a single pattern, and that pattern involves complementary symmetries. Like that, our games follow the pattern of reality, even. There's no way to escape this. If you start breaking your description of a theory of everything into an arbitrary and subjective structure, you can't convey it. It can't be just written into a book. Let's look at, like, not to pick on Luis Razo, but Razo. I like Luis a lot, so this is not really picking on him, but I could do this with anybody. But I'm doing it with him because his is a book, and his theory is a book, and that means that it's probably an arbitrary amount of pages. Even though his theory is definitely onto something. Here it is. A brief and intuitive theory of everything, from time symmetry to the holographic principle. This book sets out to change this by unifying physics both qualitatively and quantitatively in a clear and testable way that has direct implications for everything that matters to humans. I do agree with him that a theory of everything has very, very impactful and important social considerations and social applications. He's the only other person that I really see that with, other than people just talking about economics. It's 164 pages. Okay, that's pretty good. I don't know if that's arbitrary and on his part or not, but it seems like an interesting coincidence that we were just talking about that number. But it's if you did write it into a book, the amount of pages and everything would be it would have to be very specific, and I don't know what those pages would be. 720 probably, and I can show why that's the case. But this has 720 little squares. This is an inevitable number when describing reality. It even occurs in my information chain structure, which is basically the same exact, it's just another model of the totality of existence, showing how in blocks of information are changing as they spin essentially to get back to where they were. And if I highlight this, the count 720. I did not try and do that. It's just inevitable. And I predicted it too. When I made this, I was like, I bet you that's 720, and it was. And I was like, I bet you these gray squares are a very specific number as well that's very relevant. And it's 360. Or it's 36, which is 360. Which is all of those numbers